What's up, everybody? My name is Galson Anthony, the best to ever do it. Now, you know, it's suit and tie moment. That means the talks are going to be serious. And I got somebody that is a president in the studio. But before I introduce who it is, please like, comment, subscribe, and for the love of goodness, please be nice in the comments. Be respectful. This rebuttaling all the time gets a little bit tiring. Speaking of rebuttal, a president with me is pretty good at this rebuttal thing on Twitter. This man is the most presidential as far as looks, poise, and even deliverance is concerned. I'm talking about Bosa President, Mr. Musi Maimane. How you doing?
Hey, I'm good. Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
It's great having you. The G2G podcast is a very hard talk, deep. Are you ready?
Good to go, man.
Good to go.
I think anyways, I think it's important for political leadership to always be held accountable. And I think being sweetheart to politicians not only cheapens the sport, but it ultimately means that citizens are not best served.
Well, on that note, being a black face for a white party, now that you're no longer there, do you feel free?
I think the statement itself has its own weaknesses. I certainly am one who believes in a South Africa that works for all. I'm certainly am one, when I joined the DA, didn't join to become the blackface for whites. I joined because I think black people and white people can work together to be able to achieve a transformative agenda and an inclusive agenda. And that people can publicly read it as facing up. I think when I joined, certainly I was part of the Joburg caucus. I certainly believed in a transformative agenda, and I fought hard for it. You'll recall that the majority of the time when I left the DA, nearly half the caucus at the National Assembly were people of color. I'd spent a lot of time growing the DA in communities that it didn't historically work with. And I still maintain that the long-term vision of this country, at least from my perspective.
From your perspective, other people see it that a DA used you to try drawing black people and they became your puppet master. Do you feel there was a saying that DA pulled the strings for you?
Again, I think it's always important to recognize your own agency. And when I was in the DA, I had 2 master's degrees. I'd come into an organization. In fact, I was completing a second master's to be exactly accurate. I'd spent a lot of time really with a mission to transform. It's a bit like when you marry a woman. You want to build a marriage. You want to make sure there's certain things you may not know about the marriage. And there's certain things you might at the end of the marriage look back on and say, I didn't know those things. And I'm sad that it has to end. But in many ways, I went in there wanting to bring transformation. So in going into the DA, that was always the objective. That was always the sense of the organization I believed in, because my core set of values have remained the same. I am one of those people that think that if I think that you don't need to be a man to represent man, or you don't need to be a woman to represent woman, you neither need to be black to represent black people, or you don't need to be white to represent white people.
Then why do black people feel like you've betrayed them?
I think for many black people, the vision of non-racialism has had economic issues, because for many black people, the anger isn't just uniquely directly at the DA. The anger is still, in many ways, why does it feel like, in many ways, whites are still earning 6 times more than black South Africans? Why does it feel like the levers of the economy are still controlled in certain instances by many white people? And so there's that deep anguish about that issue. I think for many black South Africans, they're not out in a contestation against whites. They just want to feel, more importantly, a sense of equality and an inclusive economy that works for them.
And that doesn't seem like you gave that to them, because given that they feel betrayed by you, you're giving an answer about how black people feel, but you're not speaking about how you betrayed them according to their feeling.
No, I think maybe I'm not here to comment on how other people might have read my tenure in the DA, but I think there's a lot who look at the issue and said, hey man, we could see what you were trying to do, because they feel it. They feel it when they're going
Who are
to
these people?
So let me respond by saying that you get a lot of black South Africans who end up in corporate South Africa they walk into these spaces that, let's face it, historically, whether it be banks, insurance companies, all of them were historically owned by whites. And so they walk in and they seek to transform and be more inclusive, and they recognize the fights that you have to deal with, the fights of prejudice, the fights of knowing yourself, that sometimes you have to work double hard to achieve the same outcome as a Black South African relative to a white South African. That is not just unique within the political space. It is certainly true in corporate. It's true in other sectors. It is a vision I will not give up on.
Are you saying that you were speaking mainly to the middle class and then you didn't care about the rest of the Black people?
That's not saying you don't care. That is about saying that equally so, the vision I articulated for the DA was always a question of how do we make it possible that we build an economy that works for all South Africans. In fact, let's answer the question differently. When I left the DA, I left inherently because there wasn't a significant appreciation among some of the leaders that you can't sustain an economy upon which there's an enclave of wealth and a sea of poverty. So if you can't, and that sea of poverty being largely Black is an unsustainable situation. So I left because when we were trying to advance policies that spoke to that issue, there was high levels of resistance. When I tried to say to ourselves, how do we get more people to be representatives of the South African public broadly, there were others who resisted this issue. But more than anything, I certainly think that we are a generation of people who in some ways have to swim against the tide. In as much as I can oppose an untransformed party where that represents white people, I must equally oppose an untransformed party that would claim that it represents colored people or it represents only Black people. Because if you do that, then what's the point of elections?
You know,
then
I'm listening to your
then
answer.
Then go out of your way, look at the census results, and then say those are the election results. You do what is called demographic destiny, which then says, actually, you just take the demographics and answer. We've got to rail against that in the world, where you are finding that there are a lot of political leaders that have been elected on the back of being able to say, that's the enemy, and that enemy isn't the economy or poverty or any of that. That enemy is the color of a person's skin on the gender.
You know, one thing I don't appreciate about the answer is that you're giving me an answer to a question that wasn't quite asked. I wanted to take it down to here, to this place, because I do understand it being sensitive, because I know a lot of people, from my perspective, sometimes they're being unfair, but however, it need to be addressed, right? So in the part of you explaining that, you know, you went DA and trying to do some social, economical justice, right, for as an overall. Yet Black people feel betrayed by you and they feel like you were a puppet in there. But then you mentioned that there's a group of people, probably the upper middle class or the middle class, saw what you were doing. So it sounded like you spoke to a certain group of people, didn't have a voice in DA while they were being a puppet to you, and most Black people think like you betrayed them. That whole psyche must bother you as overall. And you're answering partial of these questions. How do you feel about it as an entirety?
No, look, I think if you're speaking to Black South Africans, their disappointment wouldn't just be with me. I think there are many Black South Africans broadly who would also be disappointed with the ANC, given the conditions that they sit. They'd be equally disappointed with the political infrastructure. And the best I could try and respond to the question is to say, in some ways, I didn't just leave the DA. I felt in 2019, upon departure, that the political system in its entirety was failing South Africans broadly. And I say,
do you want to break down how?
And firstly, so let me tell you what I did, which was what I was trying to correct. I went out when I left. We fought the Constitutional Court to amend the Electoral Act, because at the time of asking, I felt that political leaders were not accountable to citizens. And so we won in the Constitutional Court, and I spent 4 years.
Is it that 1-to-1, like you can run as an independent?
That direct election
Gotcha.
bill, because I felt that we needed to enhance accountability. Secondly, I think that we've invested an extraordinary amount of time fighting for education of Black South Africans, or broadly to say, why is it when you look at the quintiles of education, if you're in quintile 4 and 5 in this country, you can get a decent education that allows you to compete with the best in the world. But if you're quintile 1, 2, and 3, which the majority are Black South Africans who are poor, you're still getting a substandard education. You've been asked at 30%. You've been asked to pass at 30%. And more crucially, when you look at the infrastructural distribution across the population, you find that quintile 1, 2, and 3 schools are still poorly resourced. So these are fights. So let me give you another example. When you looked at the issues around even crime and safety, it became common cause that when you have to answer the question, we in South Africa spend quite a significant amount of time discussing farm murders, and we talk about, but statistically speaking, only 44 farmers, and it's 44 lives too many, were killed in the whole of last year. But if I was to line up the amount of coffins that have died in the whole of last year, I would literally measure it out by the distance of the president leaving his house in Hyde Park and ending up in Pretoria. That's 26,000 people. That's 75 bodies per day, of which the majority are black. So when we answer the question, who have we been let down with? By, I do think the political system has let down black people. And yes, I felt in many ways I couldn't continue much longer to contribute to that question.
Gotcha.
Therefore, I needed to go amend the Electoral Act, which we've now working in the process of doing. And furthermore, recognize more than anything, I've got to come back into a space where we say, when we do fight, it's not blacks versus whites. It is a fight that blacks and whites must recognize that we have a problem with too many black people left out. And therefore, all of us must participate in that fight.
I'll have a question to you when it comes down to black versus white and, coming together as all. I'll take that a bit later. The sense of questioning or a sense of interrogation is down to DA. Why did you join? How was it there? What was the conditions like? How did you prosper? How did you fail? All right, this stage I wanted to ask, how powerful was Hellen Zille? And do you feel like she basically sabotaged you?
I spent a lot of time really in the DA seeking to transform it. Hellen Zille as a powerful voice inside the DA, there's no doubt about that, because she's been the former leader, she's been the mayor and all of that.
Right.
But that shouldn't be an excuse for any leader to not want to fight for the transformative work that needed to happen. So I happen to think part of the dilemma that then unfolded post facto is that the one thing I'd take from Hellen Zille is that Hellen Zille, you may disagree with Hellen Zille, but Hellen Zille has her views and she'll stick to them. What needed to happen was the fact that as we were working hard to change the organization and to win, and the amount of work that we put in, there was a mobilization that was put on board that then didn't recognize that it was losing the battle inside the organization. It went outside the organization to starve the organization.
Explain what you mean. They went outside the organization to starve the organization.
When you then politics, there's a famous saying that politics and money are pretty much a fairly interrelated thing. It's the golden rule. Who has the gold rules? And so when people go out to donors and then try and create an impression that the organization is suffering, so they need to starve the organization of financial resource, it makes it difficult to run a campaign. And I was up against a battle upon which people sought to, whilst publicly wanting to, quote unquote, condemn identity politics, themselves were resorting to identity politics. It became the battle of the DA is for whites, the Freedom Front Plus is for Afrikaners, these parties are for blacks, etc. And that was a vision I couldn't endorse. So around perhaps maybe Hellen Zille and a few others, they felt that was a project that was pragmatic. Let me give you...
They found it was pragmatic to play identity politics.
As was everybody else, they felt.
Okay.
And
yeah, I do understand. Like all the populists played that way, but I'm just trying to get it clear from your perspective
correct.
That the DA played that.
Correct.
Okay.
Because let me tell you, one of my last meetings I had inside the DA, Tony, we put together this panel report.
Tony who?
Tony Leon.
Tony Leon, yeah.
I was very much committed to the transformation of the organization. And Tony Leon, Ryan Kutsi, and a few other people came to sit down in my office and said to them, pragmatically speaking, we're heading into coalition elections. So the best we can do is, rather than going to pursue a vision of governing for all of South Africans, let us rather bring to a coalition discussion our basket of votes who happen to be white. And then when we bring them in there, whatever the proportion of percentage is, will have to be considered in forming a coalition. So I even remember someone
So it's
using...
if I'm understanding it right, it's like, okay, guys, now that it looks like we're going to coalition, all right, all the black DAs, could you just take a back seat real quick? Let all the white DAs just step up front, because either way, ANC's black.
And so we can bring that number. And if you like, the analogy that became quite popular was that if you think about it as a shopping center,
you have different types of stores.
If you have a
different type of
Spar,
markets.
if you have a Woolworths, you have a Checkers, each of those may represent different demographics.
Spar, Woolworths, Checkers, pay a check. Just advertise.
Yeah, we'll bring the white component of the vote, and that's the route we'll go. And I rail against that, because I think whilst that may pragmatically look like it's a workable thing, it is a dangerous seed you sow in society. That means that the last place you want, particularly if you happen to be a resident of the Western Cape, I'm trying to fight hard against this argument that says you have a black government, you have a white government. Because once you create that narrative in the society, the failure of this current government can never be that it's a failure of a black government. Because once you make society believe that, you end up in a space where I'm a black South African, I've just completed a PhD in, governance. I go and look for a job. People are like, but you lot are failures, because society believes that.
Yeah.
You've socialized society into believing that. You will also socialize society upon belief that if, let's for argument's sake, say Cape Town works, and you say you have a white government in Cape Town, well, whites must know what they're doing. And that's dangerous for society.
It's dangerous. And I wanted to have what is your view on the Rainbow Nation and whatnot, but there's something that we need to really, really address, because this man betrayed black people. You're telling me the story of why you left and even entered DA, but addressing why they think that you are betrayed to them is not answered.
That's because I refute...
You refuse to answer that.
No, it's not, I don't refuse to answer it.
You refute the notion.
I refute the idea because it is not a universal idea, and you are making it sound as that. It's not. For many black South Africans,
for many black South Africans, do they feel liberated to some degree by you?
For many black South Africans, they realize the hard work it was to try and say, in systems that were working against you, you fought hard, but more than anything, they appreciate that rather than disappearing off, I carried on the fight. So whilst the feeling among some may exist, I'm trying to say that it exists because we have a long way to fight for this. And let me parallel this. And I'm not trying to, by any matter of means, say I'm equal to this particular individual. But when you think about people like Martin Luther King...
That's a big name. It's a tough one.
When people like Martin Luther King were even engaged with white people trying to fight this struggle, there were others that would be like, you're selling us out. Because we prefer the notion of black power as a fundamental principle. So that view must be held. But you and I today, with the benefit of history and hindsight, could never quite succinctly say, well, we think Martin Luther King betrayed black Americans in the fight for civil rights.
Look, let me come back just to get you to have an understanding of that, because around a similar time you had Malcolm X, and who was more, and he was more radical on the side of the left. And they're like, that's what we're looking for, not a Martin Luther. So you had these two black people that actually had one goal, but they had different methodologies to go for it.
And that is the best contrast that you put forward, because here in South Africa, there'd be others that are like, Malema. Malema is our guy because Malema speaks for blacks. I don't want to speak about what Malema would say or not say. The point is, that is in some ways the contrast. And when you then look at the history of non-racialism in that sense, I bet you today, in fact, it's not a bet. I would argue that there is an audience that would say, Mandela betrayed us.
There's a large audience. Now, this is where it speaks to why South Africans, or even in the world of politics, everybody's fickle. One day you're a hero, the next day you're not. And I wanted to lead to the next question.
But I want to finish this thought about Mandela's betrayal. Because
how do you feel Mandela betrayed the country?
I don't feel Mandela betrayed us.
Okay.
I think Mandela arrived in a context where we were a football match, it was a draw at the end of that between the Nats and the ANC. It went into penalties, and therefore we had to make decisions within that context. No one could simply say one triumphed over another, and therefore in the presence of that triumph, it was then an all ANC out rule. They had multiple considerations that they needed to bring on the table. And when you go into a negotiated settlement, some of it requires compromise. People then sit back. Those who feel like they've lost in this instance, they feel like, but you're selling us out. South Africa is a complicated place. And anyone who wants to simplistically make it that, Musi, our expectation was that you would walk into the DA and make it a triumphant black party, for argument's sake, would feel maybe you didn't do enough of that.
But there's an obsession that people have, especially those that get into the DA. I've spoken to Bongani, Baloyi, I've spoken to even Herman Mashaba. And all of them wanted it to some degree turn a white party into another ANC, right? Or to another. Why is that the obsession?
I think because it's quickly, you know, the Rivonia trial statement, I fought against black dominance and I fought against white dominance, holds true in this regard, because I think that's what Mandela was hinting at. This notion that our contestation must never be black versus white. It ought to be black and white. That's what our constitutional frame comes from. And therefore, when you come into an institution like the DA, or whatever the institution you go into, never lose track of the fact that the work that you've got to do, even within that space, is to be considerate of many of the aspects of society. And that's what leadership is. Leadership in many ways is about articulating a vision that is inclusive of all and inviting those who are beneficiaries of the past to be strong fighters and proponents of justice. And that justice may have consequences for them. That justice might mean that, we can't keep, for example, as others want to, who are extremists on one end, say we'll keep our school exclusively for our race. That's not helpful, or exclusively for a language of our race. Now you got to fight for that. And when you lead a political party like the DA, which at the time of leading, I was leading a party that was beginning to grow in all communities, which means considerations were often strong on issues. The hopes of blacks sometimes became the fears of whites. When you talk about land restitution, that's a hope for blacks. But for whites, that's a fear. When you talk about issues, for example, on transformation, it meant that as you bring on new MPs who happen to be black, white MPs sometimes felt like they were losing out.
So it's a racial dynamic that we have in the country. Now, we take a look at someone like yourself, who was a leader there. I could say, I'm not sure about my information, that a lot of black people joined because they had a lot of hope in you. Now, the question is, did those black people leave the party with you, or did they manage to stay into DA? And now, connecting to that, to the leader that you are, we look at a leader like yourself, where people feel that you're very tempestuous. You hopping all over the place because you had one South African movement. Now you have BOSA. It's like, how does one trust a leader like you if we don't feel like you have a grip on yourself?
Well, I think let history look at it properly. You say it's been tempestuous. I dismiss that, because in truth, the only fight I've ever been engaged with is a fight of a non-racial South Africa. One South Africa was a movement intent on bringing all South Africans together. The reason I left the DA was fundamentally because I felt that the organization lost the commitment to bring all South Africans together. Build One South Africa is a political movement that seeks to say, how do we bring South Africans together so it can be represented in parliament? So here's the theme that's consistent. I get it, it's not everyone's cup of tea. because it's easy to be populist. It's easy to demonize one race over another. That's the easy stuff. The hard work.
That's actually the way of politics.
Yes.
The first thing you need to do is make sure that other guy looks like the bad one.
It's much harder to spend a lot of time and say, well, what are these ideals? And let's not dismiss the one other variable that makes the composition of me as a leader, is that I come from a faith that tells me that human beings are made equal. I come from a faith that affirms that self-evident truth that all men are equal. And therefore, if you come from that, demonizing one race over another is not only a contradiction of your own philosophical point about your politics, it's an assault on your faith. And I think anyone who's racist must in fact hate God. It's got nothing to do with even me at that point.
But DA is a Christian.
It's not.
DA comprises mostly of Afrikaans people. Those Afrikaans people, they don't tend to be as staunch as, say, the VF, but they are...
I actually, the DA, the best characterization of the DA would probably to put it in a more English, not Afrikaans, English-speaking party, in that it draws its inspiration from countries like the UK, in that it draws its ideological point of departure as a, if you like, a liberal party with all of that history. And I think the only times Afrikaners came into the DA was perhaps at the merger between the DP and the NP, which was then the National Party.
I don't know if that's true, because I understand the DP with Tony Leon being the person who led it and it fizzled out, but the DA became a completely new party because the MP itself, it kind of like fizzled in by virtue of trying to find its place, but it had a new liberalism that happened at that time. So I don't know if I have to agree with you with the more English side of things, but I wanted to move on to the next point, right? Because I don't want to get too stuck there. I want to speak about you as being a leader as well.
I want to talk about the future.
You want to
talk about the past until the cows come home. The future is what we had.
Right. Now, we're still a little bit in the past. We're going to go to the present, and we're going to go to the future. You and Herman, there was a point everybody was routing for the both of y'all. It's like, look, if y'all two came together, y'all would have made a great party. But it seems that he tells me he gave you a call and says he sat down with you and it didn't work out. I said to him, is it possible that you were too much of an authoritarian in this regard? Or was it too much of an ego that maybe the both of y'all had? He said that, he can't make things be if it was not meant to be. What is your take? Why didn't y'all come together and instead of having, I believe it's 6 seats versus 11 seats, I think you both has 2 seats. Instead of having that, y'all probably would have had 50, 55 if y'all came together. Why did y'all not come together?
I think people bake too much into the electoral mathematics of saying that had we come together, maybe more would have happened.
I'm not baking it. I'd actually think that would be the case. Here's why. If you know the Belgian horse theory, each horse can, I think it's 35,000 pounds.
Yeah,
And then when they're together, they have more than double together. The question is, why didn't y'all come together? Was it ego? Because we do know, or we have a good guesstimate that if y'all did, y'all would have been a stronger party.
Well, I think that, and the other thing I wanted to say is, looking at the future, that doesn't dismiss the fact that that possibility can exist. I think we're heading into a future of coalitions. The question that we've got to put on the table is whether there'll be pre-coalitions or post-coalitions. The question you're asking me is that, could there possibly be a pre-coalition? Now, here's the pre-coalition issue. And it's
not even like a pre-coalition. It's becoming one party.
Well, that's the only way you can become a pre-coalition, is become one party on the ballot. And so to achieve that, I think to be fair, I think Herman and I could not find each other on some of the economic issues.
Like what?
He was very much committed to the idea of that if you kick out all the immigrants, that solves your problems. Necessarily, I wasn't convinced about that. I do appreciate that immigration is a conversation we need to have about how do we manage immigration? How do we ensure that...
We're talking about illegal immigration here, or just immigration as a whole?
I think under the text of immigration, there's illegal, there's managed, there's all of that. And I'm more of the doctrine that says that let's not, first of all, start off with saying immigration is bad, because there's
People
sometimes a school
immigrate
of thought.
everywhere around the
Correct.
world. So we're
We
talking
wouldn't
about
have a wine
undocumented
industry in this country had it not been for immigration.
amongst a lot of things. So I'm agreeing with that, right?
So
but where I'm getting at
so
is
we
that we're
couldn't
talking
find
about
each other.
paper trailed immigration or just
Before we enter
immigration
into
as a
the
whole.
discussion about immigration, I'm just
Yeah.
using that as
As
one
an example
of not getting together for getting together's sake, but getting together so that you understand what you want to tell the voters. Because at the same time as being in one boat, if you're speaking on multiple messages, you have a problem. The other issue that I thought was going to be important was maybe in some way, some of the approach at the time, I was very much committed to saying, we're not trying to solve for our own political futures here. I was starting the One South Africa movement, where I felt that it was important that if our politics are going to work, we need to engage communities, give power back to the people.
But then
And so
give it
here's the thing.
back to who? To the illegal immigrants too?
No. We'll get to the immigration question in a moment, and I'm happy to talk about that. I don't have a problem with that. But I was just really responding to the philosophical way of the most important thing you do in a political party is which candidates you choose, right? It's one of the most fundamental things that tell you everything about politics, and it's what happens, why political parties break up, etc. At the time, Herman Mashaba felt that we could literally go and pick people we like, create a list, and then go. At the time, I philosophically and still philosophically think that actually the best representation comes from communities themselves. Let the communities tell them who can represent them. So in many ways, we had that divergent view where he was saying, give a list, and I was going, go out, find them in the communities, and let the communities tell you who they want. That's why as One South Africa, we're able to mobilize independent candidates all across the country and won, from that perspective, more seats than actually ActionSA. Because we went out and said, get an independent candidate in this community, let them stand.
I think
Because
with
that's
that
where
being
accountability
said,
comes.
and I understand, but I think it's a little unrealistic. So the one South Africa movement, it may have won more seats, but then it didn't last. That's why it turned into Bosa SA, number one. Number two, if we're looking all the centrist, if we're looking all the centrist tilting right, you're the one at the bottom of the list. So you went from a top of the list at DA, right? Heading DA. Hey, we love the guy. Then at the bottom there, it's like he's barely making it.
But let me also give another clarity about this issue about why we had to bring on Build One South Africa, is because we were committed to the model of making sure that communities nominate their people. But we realized that if in a city you only need about 5,000 votes to get a seat, at national, the law made it such that you needed 90,000 votes to get a seat. Now, do I still believe that politicians are accountable to people? I think we've got a long way to go in that. So that cannot be a fight that's lost. And so, yes, what you rather want in life? Do you want at the end of your life to have said, I fought for my convictions and died by them, or I suspended my convictions and got to the top?
I mean, in theory,
which do you want?
And obviously, when you put it like that and you give me one or the other, it's like dying by what you believe. I understand that. All right. So you got into 9 years into DA and you didn't get what you want. You partially got what you want in One Movement South Africa. You had Bosa, and you are a politician that is like we don't know about it. Do you think it will be wise not to just be like one of the populists, probably fight instead of fighting corruption, somehow find your way in and try to clean yourself out from there? Because that's what's how everybody's getting in. Everyone's getting in through some form of corruption, getting their hands dirty, and then they say, look, we don't want corruptions thereafter. Don't you think maybe that's the way you should use?
I'm 45, man, and hopefully, God willing, I'll live long enough to continue to fight for this country. And if I want to get that right, man, I think, let me tell you who I draw inspiration from. Hakainde Hichilema, the president of Zambia. Hakainde and I have been very good friends for a long time. He lost a few elections before that. Some of them were rigged, some of them all of that. But he stuck to his convictions. Now today he's the president of Zambia. Duma Boko, the president of Botswana, is a very dear friend of mine. I was with Duma 2 weeks before he won the election in Botswana. He had no money because he wasn't willing to be corrupt. He had no money. I remember we were trying to figure out some money to try and say, how do we get you back to Botswana, etc., etc. Today he's the president. My point simply is this, is that you want to do something, do it quick, then try and figure out how to do it illegally. But if you want a country that at the end of it, once you get to the top of it, you've done so having held your head high, you can then have the authority to reform the system. Otherwise, you get elected, you continue on more of the same trajectory, and what happens is the economy struggles. So you and I are talking about a gamble. I'm taking the gamble of saying, I'm going to stick to principle and get to the end. You are saying in some ways, or maybe not you are asking me the question.
I'm asking you the questions. These are not my ideas.
Yeah. Is
right?
it not better off to simply just say, join the club, be corrupt, play the game? And I'm going, it's a dangerous thing because it doesn't help society.
I might agree with you, but then there's a lot of reasons why I say, look, you are definitely, when it comes down to poise, the ability to speak, you're the most presidential person, right? Now, I think people don't care about that person anymore. The person that wears a suit and tie real good. The guy that does the walk and talk right. Nobody cares about that guy anymore. They want the populace. You look at the other parties, that's what they are. They're the radicalism. Okay, so that quality, you're not taking it. You've got more of a clean look. Number two, you refuse or you're not engaging in coalition. We look at people that are tilting right. We're looking at PA, ActionSA, yourself, and maybe one or two others if they're not coming to mind now. Why not sit down with them and say, look, man, we all believe in anti-corruption. Let's walk in that route. Why is that the case? Is it maybe down to a place where you're going to turn 65 and a leader that could have been something, maybe all the stuff that we're talking about here in 2005 and 2009 until 2025, could be changed by just saying, look, I'm making the right decisions now to walk the right way?
So let me bring this insight. There is a conversation being had at the moment about bringing the centrist parties together.
Right.
And we've learned some lessons. The first lesson we learned was from the multi-party charter, which, as Build One South Africa, I said, we're not going to be a part of that. Why? Because it has been a stuff up that it is. That you should congratulate me for
now,
that.
What if you were a part of it and it didn't become a stuff up? Because the thing is, it becomes a stuff up by missing components.
No, it became a stuff up because in conceptual design, it was poor. I knew going into that thing that you can't say 4 or 5 parties are going to work together. You go vote for whichever party that you want to vote for.
And
within
then the party
4 or 5
gets into, yeah.
There was no glue that meant that post-election, that thing was going to work. Right now, today, what's the organizing question for South Africa? What is the question South Africans have to solve for? This is the question. As the ANC declines, who fills that void? That's the question. Now, you can answer the question by saying, I'm happy to be inside it. Or you can answer the question by saying, I'm happy to build something that will capture that. That's the question. And at this point in time, we took a view that says, fine, it's good to have a GNU. And it probably is the best of the worst options we could have been confronting. But I'm going to bring all the people who share centrist view, who have an economic disposition that they want to take. Let's bring them together. What's different between that and the MPC is that those parties need to have one party on the ballot, because then whatever that party is, that's what actually enters government, which means that's the glue that holds the thing together. And does that party begin to occupy the space of giving an alternative? You know who's the largest party in this country? It's the no vote. That is the biggest party in the country. It is the party of people who say, I'm not voting. And
why do South Africans have that no hope in anybody anymore?
And perhaps maybe we haven't given them ideas of the future. The majority of the people who are not voting are young people. So I can understand young people's anguish and anger. They are the most unemployed. They are the most who are facing conditions where they are questioning their own future, because every election is a referendum on the future. And I also do think that they are the ones who are feeling like you are spewing off these solutions to us without us. And so one of the things we've had to try and consciously work at is, how do I get candidates to come on? So yes, we know we're working on a model, but here's the one thing I'm proud of, man. Nobuntu Hlazo Webster, the deputy leader of BOSA, never came from politics. She was in business and she came on board. Ayanda Ali, the representative here in the Gauteng legislature, here was a woman who, before her life, she was in broadcast, she was doing other things. She came on board. When you looked at our list that we put before the IEC, there were lawyers, there were professionals, there were people who came from communities. many of which I'd never met until the day the list was revealed. Now, are we trying to do something different in politics and disrupt politics? That's what I think we're trying to do. Does it work perfectly the first time around? Maybe not, but we'll keep improving on it because I believe inherently, and I still do, that if you want state capture, if you want a repeat of state capture, whether it's by black people, white people, whichever party you like, keep the model as you have it now, because all it means is that you buy the leader and you get the whole party for free. And people feel betrayed by democracy because they feel like, here I am at home. We're in Johannesburg. So let me give you an example. Charlotte Maxeke burns down. Who's responsible for that when it's not built years on end? When the police station down the road from you, in a country where 75 people are being murdered every day, and no one responds because the police station is inadequately resourced, I know all of those issues. No one is held accountable. Why? Because there's a list system. Whereas actually, if we had a constituency-based system, you could pick up the phone and say, on issues of national competence, Musi, you live in this community. In this community, the hospitals, the clinics, the schools, they don't work. Those are the things we're discussing in Parliament.
So this is why the other day, I'm actually giving you compliment as we go. I say you're the most presidential person through and through, not just only by poise, but also by how you think. The issue with me that I have with you, and this is, I'm drilling it down you, is that you're losing the people, right? You're losing the people through and through. Now, I want to ask you, is it time maybe we just drop a little bit of ego and say, party so-and-so, let's talk quickly. The country is taking a nosedive. That one, we can't avoid it. And we're going to keep going. 75 people being murdered a day, 69 to 75 people being murdered daily. You said, 22,000 coffins every single day. Crime is going up. This is now starting to become everywhere. Down the road from us is Alexander. It is a jungle out there. Not too far from you are all the townships in Cape Town, murder capital of South Africa, I believe Africa. When are we going to get to a point to say, look, we see it happening. Our constituencies need to go to work instead of looking at national government. What is your next move to get that right?
I think, don't miss my point I made earlier, that there is a conversation being had about how do we bring a number of parties together. Up until recently, there's a conversation with Rise, there's a conversation taking place with Good, there's a conversation with parties that share centrist view, there's a conversation with ActionSA.
About the bigger ones, okay.
There's a conversation with Patriotic Alliance. I certainly reach out to a number of parties. Let me say this, and say it guardedly. Despite my departure from the DA, I still think the DA has a role to play in society and in the country. Has the DA served us best by being in the GNU? I think they took the electoral calculus that says, let's defend against an ANC-EFF coalition. But
that is the popular talk, as a matter of fact.
I actually think that the fundamental question that we should put on the table is, what are the alternatives in the country? That is the question.
What are the alternatives?
And so what I would rather have seen a situation that occurs is that if you get a party like the DA, who's the second largest party, it should be obsessing a question about how do you build a majority with others, working together collectively, so that there can be an alternative. Because as things stand at the moment...
But you're not specifying the alternative.
It would be tantamount to, if you were in the UK, the Conservatives being in coalition with Labour. What then gets left after that? So far, Parliament is 70-30. 70% are in the GNU, 30% outside the GNU. So when I tell you what is the alternative, the reason I take the DA as an example is because were we to say, how do we find some common policy objectives, they could be one of the parties that you could work with, PA, ACDP, many others that you bring on board, because the ANC is a block on itself. And let's not forget, the extension of the ANC are its surrogates, MK and EFF. So that is one block of parties, if you like.
Right.
The rest need to formulate an alternative block, which, as things stand at the moment, represent 40% of South Africans.
So you reckon if these become a coalition by some sort of miracle, plus the voters, the non-voters, they would be bigger than the GNU and all the leftists?
Absolutely. Because what is the collective feeling in the country? The collective feeling in the country is that we're heading not in the right direction.
Right.
The collective feeling in the country is that the economy isn't heading in a way that meets our interests. So when confronted with that question, given that the ANC has had 31 years, a shot at this, isn't it about time that we try a different way? Now, let me say this, and I want to say this point categorically. I have time and respect for President Ramaphosa. I've worked with him, I've engaged him. But I think the future of this country will begin to turn when, for once, we can have a non-ANC president. Because I think, in many ways, what that says to people is that truly this country is democratic. It can pick someone who doesn't come from, who introduces post-liberation type politics. And thirdly, I think South Africa needs to stop living in the nostalgia and the halo of Mandela and that generation and begin to say, let's talk about the future.
Let's look at the reality of the situation. That's basically what you're saying, and I agree with that. And again, I'm going to come down to the Rainbow Nation question a little bit later, as I want to track back. So what's happening right now is that a new climate has come in and says the new president of South Africa will be Petrus Motsepe. Now, Petrus Motsepe has really moved South Africans. I mean, he's got the soccer thing. Everybody loves soccer. It's the biggest in the country. He's the one guy that has got a clean record, so to put it. And he becomes the president of South Africa. How do you feel about that? Do you feel like it's going to be the same thing all over again?
I wish he could contest as an independent and we could really amend the electoral laws.
But I don't think he can leave ANC because he is because of ANC.
No, what I'm saying is this is where the system, to tie a bow on my previous diagnostic question.
I get your
Imagine
part.
If he was able to stand directly and we could vote directly. Now we can contest for ideas because, governing in South Africa today can't just be about vibes. Now, I like the vibes he gives off. The vibe of he's ran a football club. That's a good vibe. But what are his ideas about this country? What future does he see? Well, when we discuss crime, as a simple example, it's not going to take vibes. It's going to take someone. I say, when I want to think about crime, devolve policing to cities and merge metro police so that you have intelligence and you can fight crime. That's my idea. What's his? If you talk about the economy and we talk about either we industrialize or how we look at it, it's one thing to deal with the macroeconomic climate, about fixing ports, keeping the lights on. But what incentives do you give to improve gross capital formation, which is the increase of investment?
I mean, that sounds good. Idea? But then if you ask...
What's his ideas?
What's his idea? I think that's fair. But you also give me a vibes feel when it comes down to the immigration parts. I mean, you want to be like, okay, let's be nice to the immigrations, people, the illegal immigrations. So it does kind of feel that y'all are tantamount there.
Be nice to illegal immigrants. I think illegal immigration is the reason we end up in the challenges that we have. Rather, make it possible for people to be legal quickly. That's what you've got to try and achieve.
But then how are you going to, the infrastructure of the country to carry these illegal people? How are you going to handle that?
You want to talk about carrying illegal people. I'm saying make it possible for people to be legal quickly. So in other words, be clear that at borders, let's put it this way. Be clear that at borders, you've got an effective home affairs system that makes sure anyone who comes into the country can do so legally. Once you do that, because I actually do think part of where this discussion that has a blanket illegal. So let me give you a good example. Go to most of our universities. You're going to meet professors who come in there who are great lecturers, contributing, tax-paying citizens. They get treated the same because the process of legalizing is so hard. Mm. And Because it's so
Yeah.
hard,
So
it
let's call it
incentivizes
like this:
perverse behavior.
undocumented, because there's a large number of
No,
undocumented
you
people.
certainly can't sustain that.
Right.
There's no
So-
debate about that.
Okay. So now the thing is that say we have an issue of undocumented people that are here. It sounds like you're on the vibes with that. Do you think they should just go home immediately? Would you be one of those
I'm just
presidents
saying-
who's going to have like an iron fist and a stern hammer to it?
I would immediately, once you devolve policing, use massive intervention. I want everybody to be documented, and let's. So this is what I'd do. I'd go into the city center of Johannesburg, which I'd deploy our entire security personnel, make sure that anyone who's undocumented either gets documented or leaves this country.
Okay, but
This is a simple
I've
thing.
got a couple of thousands and you're police, but like, you know what? How about you?
That's a question
That's
of corruption.
That's the thread of South African policing.
Yeah, but
that is the thread.
That's
How would you handle that?
So, I mean, for me, the seed of corruption is the lack of transparency in its fundamental basis. So all transactions must take place in public. Make sure this thing can be digitized so that it will make it easy. If you're an immigrant in this country, let me give you a digital portal. You can apply. You can show. We can demonstrate. Anyone can log on to the portal. Make sure we can demonstrate how the decision to either reject or grant you citizenship was done, so that all of it is transparent, so that no one is paying off anyone. The problem at the moment is that the majority of transactions that take place between law enforcement and citizens happens in the back door and cash. So begin to eradicate that almost aggressively and be clear about the fact that you want transparency.
What about taxes for immigrants?
And lastly, man, in truth, technology is beginning to democratize access and making certain things easier to decide on. Artificial intelligence gives me an opportunity that as you log your application from Zimbabwe or from Malawi or from Sweden, because I think some of this issue has this undertone of being anti-fellow Africans, and be quick to kind of go, well, Russians, Chinese, Americans, Europeans, they can be here, and clearly just by the color of their skins, they must be here legally. That isn't always tangentially true necessarily. Therefore, let's use technology to be able to make quick decisions so that people, the issue at core for any citizen, for anybody, is to know that you can achieve legal certainty. My philosophical departure about immigration stems out of what is called a circular flow of immigration. If you know you can legalize in a country, leave and come back, it stops you from wanting to be illegal. Because you often find, you speak to a Malawian, so I want to be in South Africa. If you help them go, we'll give you a visa, we'll use technology to track you down, we'll know where you're at. You have confidence to know, if I only want to be here for a week,
that's a Malawian
back.
attitude. When we look at the Somali or a Nigerian in general's attitude, is not the case. So I guess when we generalizing, it differs from person to person. Okay, I think I'm getting a clear view of how you want to handle immigration or undocumented people. I'm just trying to see how was it different between you and Mashaba. But I want to skip that and get to the place to what you advocate for. Right. When I look at South Africa, and you take away the color, maybe just get on the phone and you listen to this person speak and you listen to 5 others. Which one was white, which one was black, I couldn't tell because they've got the same mentality. For some reason in South Africa, the inside is very divisive, that they find differences and fight on the differences. You fight for one South Africa. Many say that Rainbow Nation World Cup 1996, if I've got the year right, and World Cup 1994 or 1994 came in 2010, those are all events. And I always argue then they were successful events. People came together. How about we make this event a permanent thing? And they say, no, it's not going to happen. We have to fight white supremacy. We have to fight black danger, swat rafar. We have to fight that. You advocate for oneness. In your mind, why is that a winning process?
In pre-1994, your definition as to what it means to be a South African always required a preface of race. 1994's Constitution 95 signed into law said you could self-identify. 2029, you get a new leader who's not in the ANC. let's give a better definition of what it means to be a South African that moves beyond the question of race. Because maybe at a personal level, and talk about me, my wife's a white South African, my kids are mixed race. Right? We celebrate diversity at home, but we are all clear where all Maimane is. That's a starting point. Every leader all over the world, Germans, Otto von Bismarck had to define what does it mean to be German post-Nazism. The United States of America has had its own dilemma. Paul Kagame had to define what it means to be Rwandan post the genocide. We haven't done that. And therefore, to define what it means to be South African beyond the question of race is to infuse within it the definition of what does it mean to be an African. And once I thought President Mbeki was beginning that project, and when you back it up with economic growth of 5%, actually the Rainbow Nation project had its most success at that point. So there is a dilemma that says that for those who say these are events are wrong, because actually, frankly, if you begin to give definition to say, to me, what it means to be a South African and an African is to ascribe to a certain level of values, the value of Ubuntu, the idea that I am because we are, to hark back on what Steve Biko says, that I give to the world a more human face, that to be South African is to be hardworking and to be dedicated at task, which speaks to maybe some of the religious infrastructure that sits in this country. To be South African is also to demonstrate an attitude that says we, in all languages, in all language groups in this country, there's a sense of a burumaka plan, or we make a plan. The idea of hardworkingness comes onto the table. Codify that, define that, give it values, and then begin to say, that's what we're going to reward, and that's who we are. Because if you were to arrive in this country, that's what you got to see. Then you stop making it an event. You start making it an identity, because that's where change begins. Once you can drive that into society and fight for it, and you as a leader keep calling it out because it exists within the people. I sometimes think when we want to define and divide people on the basis of race, on the streets, on some of the communities, I think people are wanting to work together. I want to bait for them.
And I want to actually say that is that I said this too. I don't remember what I was sitting with here. It's like, if you actually trace back, if you're old enough, races weren't really fighting each other like that. Maybe there may have been an issue between races here and there, but they weren't fighting like that until ANC Julius Malema. Then he ruffled those feathers, and since then the fight began. If you estimate it, you're looking at 2012. Before then, it wasn't really there. Right now, someone will argue with me differently. I say, okay, let's look at the nuances per se.
Race relations also must be backed up by an economic plan that is shared by everybody in economic growth. Because when people feel like resources are shrinking, they are incentivized to lager. And it creates the political conditions upon which populists thrive. But whereas when you look at 2000 to 2007, 2008, South Africa's GDP growth was at 5%. You had counter-cyclical
4.9 was the highest. Yeah.
So once people get that feeling, they feel like we're winning. The World Cup as an event was an outcome of the fact that the build-up towards it created something. We become racially divisive when we feel like crime is not under control. And not that we become that because we feel like, man, we're being killed here and no one is doing anything. That's a governance failure. So you've got to be able to do two things. Hark on the identity issue, but equally so, work hard to make sure that you are creating a shared economic plan and keeping people safe. Because once people feel that way, then I don't have to feel like when I walk around the mall,
there's a certain demographic I've got to be
looking out for, whatever. And when people feel like we're all participating in this, then I don't suddenly believe what apartheid taught, which was to say, actually, blacks belong there, whites belong there. You stop that. You actually invite people to know that competence and incompetence are both values distributed across all races. Corruption and non-corruption are values distributed across all races. And therefore, evil and good are values described across all races. Therefore, I can't reduce what I deem to be good to be a prescribe of one race and what I deem to be bad to be a prescribe of another.
Well, said like a non-populist, and I really enjoy having this conversation with you. I want to say a few things. As somebody who's in half and half myself, and also who has kids that are half and half, I understand those dynamics. I understand the fingers that they point at one to say, oh, because you're this, you're a sellout. You're not good enough for that. I can also appreciate your integrity as far as how you're running. From, I think, offset, we can talk about other ideas or rebranding, so to put it. In my world, it's called rebranding. To change, not to necessarily change that, but to speak more to the people in the way that they listen. Because I think people are not listening to you, and they should. They're not hearing you, what you're saying, or what you're doing. Yes, it's a small group of people, and those group of people tend to be more silent. I want to say to you, keep going. I always close my podcast with encouragement. Keep going. Candidates for one day being presidency with the Hope So, I support you, right? I just want you to look into a few things, make those changes, be there for the youths, because the youths, you're young enough to still talk to the youth, help them with unemployment. South Africa doesn't care about employment to the youth. Like you said, they're the least youth, and so many other things that is not coming to the top of my head. Keep going and make sure you're one of those presidents, if you ever come out, to be the president who represents this country well. Can you do that, boys?
I'm going to work my life to try and get that right. But
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, there you have it. The questions were asked. Satisfied or not, I asked them. I try to push him. Some answers but you tell me how you felt about it. But some answers were pretty clear. So until next time, please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. And the next time we have a conversation, there's a lot we're going to talk about, especially the policies of youth employment. And DJ Shimza, I wanted to speak about DJ Shimza. Right? I didn't get the opportunity to do that, but next time I'll make sure that I do that. So until next time, peace out.